They gave my seat to a woman who wasn't even blood. They told me to stand in the back, like a man who'd wandered in off the street. My own daughter looked at the floor, said nothing. My son-in-law said I get confused in crowds, loud enough for half the family to hear. $60,000 was sitting in a trust 3 years old. None of them knew whose name was on it. I didn't argue. I never do. I found a short in a light panel instead. Fixed it with my hands, the way I fixed everything for 50 years. Let a lawyer named Priscilla Nolan carry the rest onto a stage. Then the whole room turned around, every last one of them, to look at the man they'd told to stand in the back. But before the light panel, before the folding chairs in the gymnasium and the woman sitting in my seat, there was a drive up Highway 51 in a truck older than my grandson. My name is Vernon Ferris. I am 72 years old. I don't raise my voice. Never had a reason to. When something's wrong in a wall, you don't yell at it. You go looking for the short. You fix it. Quiet. The lights come back on like nothing happened. I was standing at the back of the gymnasium in my good suit. That's when the usher told me my seat had already been given to somebody else. He said it soft, like it was nothing, like he was telling me the concession stand ran out of coffee. Folding chairs set up 8 rows deep on the gym floor, blue and gold balloons taped to the backboard. A banner that said, "Congratulations, class of across the far wall." Somewhere out there, my grandson Caleb was lining up in a rented gown, 2 sizes too big in the shoulders. And a woman I didn't know all that well was sitting in the chair that had my name taped to the back of it. Deborah Brennan, my son-in-law's mother, sitting in the 3rd row. Family section, purse in her lap. Looking straight ahead like she'd bought that seat fair and square. There's been some kind of mix-up, the usher said. 19 years old, maybe 20. A kid working the door for extra credit. He wasn't the one who did this. He was just the one standing closest when I found out. "No mix-up," I said. "Just tell me where you'd like me to stand." He blinked at that. Kids expect a fight. I've never given anybody one. 45 years running an electrical business. First out of a panel truck, then out of a real shop on Substation Road. I learned early that yelling never fixed a circuit. It never fixed a person either. You find the short. You fix it. You don't argue with the wall. I found my son-in-law Kyle Brennan near the trophy case, working his phone, not looking up. I heard what he told the usher before I ever got close. Kyle Brennan has never once in 11 years lowered his voice around me the way he thinks he has. "Vernon gets confused in crowds anyway," he said. "He'll be fine standing in the back." Confused. That's the word they like. Confused, like a man who traced wiring by ear for half a century, suddenly can't find a folding chair with his own name on it. I looked at my daughter Melissa across the gym floor. She was arranging programs on a table. She saw me. I know she saw me. She looked back down at the programs like they needed her more than I did. 11 years married to Kyle Brennan. Somewhere in there, my daughter learned how to look at a stack of paper instead of her own father. I didn't say a word to either of them. I walked to the lobby instead. The overhead light by the trophy case had been flickering since I walked in. Off, on, in a stutter most people wouldn't even notice. I noticed. 45 years of noticing's not something you retire. I found the panel behind a fire door, found the loose neutral in about 90 seconds, the way you'd find a splinter in your own thumb. Didn't need a tool for it. I twisted the wire nut a half turn. The light steadied out. I stood there a second in the quiet hum of it working right again. A woman filming the hallway on her phone for the school's live stream caught the whole thing without meaning to. My hand in that panel, calm as a man checking his mail. I didn't think a thing of it at the time. I'd learn later that 30 seconds of footage would end up mattering more than anybody in that building could have guessed. My wife Adele would have laughed at all of it. The panel, the folding chair. Kyle Brennan's voice carrying across a gymnasium like a man's opinion gets louder just because his mortgage is late. Adele taught 3rd grade in Holden Springs for 31 years. She kept my company's books at the kitchen table every night for 2 decades. Penciled every column herself. Wouldn't let me touch a ledger past supper. She's been gone 5 years now. Riverside Cemetery, on the edge of town, under a maple that turns the colour of a torch every October. I still keep her reading glasses on the nightstand. I don't need them for anything. I keep them anyway. Ferris Electric Contracting started with $400 of tools in the bed of a used panel truck. 1979. I built it into the outfit half of Marathon County called First when the power went sideways. Farms and factories, and the school district too. 5 years ago, I sold the operating business to a regional firm. $1,100,000. Kept the shop building on Substation Road, kept the land under it. Kept a consulting retainer of $4,000 a month that still comes in whether I lift a finger or not. I am not a rich man by the standards of a city. I am a very particular kind of rich by the standards of Holden Springs, Wisconsin. Everybody in this family has known it since before Caleb was born. Holden Springs sits 25 minutes north of Warsaw, a farm supply town with one stoplight worth mentioning. Tucked into a river valley that floods a little every spring and always drains fine by June. My house is on Kestrel Lane, brick ranch, wired every inch of it myself in 1979, the same summer I started the company. I have lived in it 47 years. County seats in Ambrose, 9 miles east, where the bank and the law office sit 2 doors apart on the same block, like they were built to keep an eye on each other. I went back to the gymnasium with the panel humming steady behind me, found a folding chair against the back wall, stood by it instead of sitting. A man in a good suit standing quiet draws less attention than a man in a good suit trying to prove a point. Walt Girard found me there. My old shop foreman. 70 years old himself. Hands like a stack of leather washers. Worked for Ferris Electric 26 years before I sold the place out from under both of us. I made sure his pension was iron before I signed anything. Walt doesn't say much. Never has. He just came and stood next to me at the back wall, arms crossed. That was the whole conversation. "They took your seat," he said finally. "They did. You're going to do something about it." "I already did something about it," I said. "Light panels fixed." Walt almost smiled at that. It's the kind of thing only a man who's worked a trade for 50 years understands right away. You don't waste your voice on people who aren't going to listen. You go fix the thing that's actually broken. What Walt didn't know, what nobody in that gymnasium knew, except a lawyer 9 miles away in Ambrose. 3 years ago, the spring after Adele died, I walked into Priscilla Nolan's office with $60,000 from the sale of my business. I opened a trust, named it after my wife instead of myself, on purpose, so nobody in this family would ever trace it back to me and start asking for a piece of it early. The Adele Ferris Memorial Scholarship, for kids in Holden Springs High going into a trade. Wiring, welding, diesel work, anything you build with your hands instead of talk about with your mouth. My grandson Caleb applied for it this spring. He doesn't know I funded it, doesn't know his own grandmother's name sits on $60,000 because his grandfather couldn't stand the idea of that boy growing up thinking a trade was something you settle for. He won it. I found out from Priscilla Nolan, a phone call 2 weeks before the graduation. I sat in my kitchen, holding the phone a long moment, looking at Adele's reading glasses on the counter, where I'd left them that morning, before I said a word back to her. "Is Vernon Ferris confused?" Priscilla had said to me on the phone, dry as county paperwork. "Or is Vernon Ferris the only man in that family who's known exactly what he's doing since 1979? I didn't laugh often those days. I laughed at that. Now I stood at the back of a gymnasium in my good suit, holding no chair, no program, nothing but the knowledge of what was coming. I watched my son-in-law take his own seat in the row where mine used to be. I watched my daughter still not look at me. I thought about an envelope sitting in the glove box of my truck outside, addressed to Priscilla Nolan. In my own handwriting, I've been carrying it around for 2 weeks, like a man carrying a spare key he hoped he'd never need. Deborah Brennan leaned over to Kyle and said something I couldn't hear. Both of them smiled the way people smile when they think a problem has already been solved. I'd find out later exactly what problem they thought that was. I already had a fair idea. Guardianship isn't a word families use lightly. I'd heard it twice now, second-hand, at 2 different family dinners, dressed up soft as concern. Deborah had said it again just last month, standing in my own kitchen, telling my daughter it was time to help Vernon simplify things now that he's slowing down. I wasn't slowing down. I was 60 seconds from fixing a light panel nobody else in that building could find. But if a man wants to believe you're slow, sometimes the kindest thing, and the most useful thing, is to let him keep believing it a little while longer. The ceremony hadn't started yet, chairs still scraping on a gym floor, a band tuning up somewhere behind the stage curtain. Parents finding seats with the particular anxious hurry of people who paid good money for good seats and mean to sit in them. I stood at the back wall with Walt Gerard beside me. I watched my family sitting in the row that used to have my name on it. I did not feel small standing there. I want to be honest about that. It would be easy to tell this story and make the standing in the back part sound like the low point. It wasn't. The low point had already happened 3 years earlier at a different kitchen table when I signed the papers that made all of this possible and told no one, not even Melissa, exactly what I had done. Everything after that chair, the ceremony, the diplomas, the moment Priscilla Nolan would take that stage, it was just the structure finally settling into the shape I'd already poured for it. I'll tell you how we got here, not from the gymnasium, from $400 of tools in a panel truck. A woman who kept my books at a kitchen table for 20 years. A family that forgot, somewhere along the way, exactly whose hands built the town they were all still standing in. 1979. I was 25 years old, $400 of tools in the bed of a Ford panel truck. A marriage license 3 months old. Adele was 23, teaching 3rd grade for $8,000 a year at Holden Springs Elementary. She told me flat out the first week I went into business for myself that she'd keep the books, or I'd run this thing into the ditch inside a year. She wasn't wrong. I could trace a short in the dark. I could not, back then, tell you what a receivable was. We started in a rented shed on Substation Road for $60 a month. First real contract was rewiring the feed mill after a fire. $1,100. I remember standing in that scorched building thinking it was the most money I'd ever touched at once. By 1985, we had 2 trucks and 3 men working under me. By 1995, we had a real shop, a real crew, contracts with half the dairy farms and grain operations in Marathon County. Adele sat at our kitchen table every night with a ledger book and a mechanical pencil. She caught every late invoice, every customer stalling on a payment, years before I'd have noticed on my own. We had one daughter, Melissa, born in 1983. Sweet kid, quiet, never gave us trouble. She grew up in the shop as much as the house, riding along in the truck some Saturdays, learning to hand me the right gauge of wire before she learned to ride a bike without training wheels. I used to think she'd take the business over one day. Life doesn't always pour where you want it to. Melissa met Kyle Brennan in 2013 at a wedding 2 towns over. He was working the finance desk at a car dealership in Ambrose back then. Sharp suit, easy laugh, the kind of handshake that goes on a half second too long so you notice it. I didn't dislike him at first. I want to be fair about that. I thought he was a little slick. Slick isn't the same as bad. They married in 2014. I paid for the reception hall myself, $11,000, because Melissa asked. I never once in my life told that girl no on something that mattered to her. Adele wore blue. She danced with me twice that night. Told me quietly, near the end of it, that she didn't fully trust the way Kyle looked at people when he thought nobody was looking back. I told her she worried too much. I was wrong and she was right, and that's a pattern that held for the rest of our marriage. Kyle left the dealership job in 2016, bought into a used car lot in Ambrose, Brennan Motors, with a partner who bailed out inside 2 years and left Kyle holding the whole operation. He financed the buyout with debt. He always financed things with debt. I loaned him $18,000 that first year. Quiet, no interest. The kind of thing you do for family and don't mention again. He paid me back $9,000 of it. The other 9 I let go. Adele noticed I let it go. She didn't say anything either. Not then. Caleb was born in 2015, my only grandson. That boy did more to keep me steady through the next 10 years than anything else in my life, except my wife. First time I held him at the hospital in Ambrose, 7 pounds 4 ounces. I made him a promise out loud that nobody else heard, that he would never grow up thinking his hands were worth less than somebody else's diploma. I didn't know yet how much that promise would end up costing, or who I'd end up protecting him from. Adele got sick in the winter of 2020. I won't dwell on it, she wouldn't have wanted me to. It moved fast and it moved cruel, and by that spring she was gone. 67 years old, 31 years, teaching 3rd grade. At her funeral, half of Holden Springs showed up. Farmers and factory men. Grown adults who still called her Mrs. Ferris. That's the kind of mark she left on a town. Kyle gave a eulogy at that funeral, stood up in a black suit and talked for 6 minutes about family and legacy. How Adele would want us all to stay close. I sat in the front pew, hands folded. Thought about the $18,000 and the $9,000 he never paid back. Didn't say a word. A funeral's not the place to collect a debt. 3 months after she died, I sold Ferris Electric Contracting to a regional utility services firm out of Green Bay. $1,100,000. Kept the shop building on Substation Road. Kept the 4 acres under it. Kept a consulting retainer of $4,000 a month for advising on transition, which mostly meant answering a phone call twice a year. I put $600,000 of the sale into conservative accounts. I put another chunk into fixing up the house on Kestrel Lane the way Adele always wanted it fixed. New roof, new kitchen. The garden out back replanted with the perennials she'd been asking for since 2011. And I took $60,000. Drove 9 miles to Ambrose. Walked into the office of a lawyer named Priscilla Nolan. I'd used Priscilla for small things over the years. Contracts. A property line dispute with a neighbour back in the 90s. She's sharp. She's quiet. And she doesn't repeat things she shouldn't. I sat across from her desk that day and told her I wanted to set up a scholarship trust for kids at Holden Springs High going into a trade. Wiring, welding, diesel mechanics, plumbing. Anything built with 2 hands instead of talked about with a mouth. Whose name goes on it? She asked me. Adele's, I said. Not mine. She looked at me a long moment. Why not yours, Vernon? You earned it. Because if my name's on it, I told her, somebody in this family is going to start asking why there's $60,000 sitting somewhere they didn't know about. If Adele's name is on it, nobody asks. They just think it's a nice thing the school does. Priscilla didn't argue. She drew up the trust documents inside 2 weeks. The Adele Ferris Memorial Scholarship for Trade and Technical Excellence, funded at $60,000, dispersing awards of roughly $4,000 a year to a graduating senior pursuing a trade certification or apprenticeship. I signed it in her office on a grey Tuesday in October, drove home, didn't tell Melissa, didn't tell Kyle. For 3 years that trust sat quiet in a filing cabinet in Ambrose, the way a breaker sits quiet in a panel until the day you actually need it. I want to be plain about something. It matters for everything that comes after. I didn't build that trust as a weapon. I built it because a woman I loved for 44 years cared more about kids learning a trade than about almost anything else in her life. I wanted her name on something that would outlast both of us. The fact that it later became the exact instrument that saved me from my own family, that part I didn't plan. That part felt like Adele reaching down from wherever she is, doing one more piece of bookkeeping on my behalf. Life went on quiet after that. Kyle expanded Brennan Motors in the 2022, took on a floor plan loan of $140,000 to stock more inventory, personally guaranteed the note himself, which meant if the lot ever went under, the debt came straight for his own house, his own savings, his own name. I didn't know the exact figure at the time. I knew he'd expanded. I knew he'd started talking a little louder at family dinners about how well things were going. In my experience, when a man starts narrating his own success uninvited, the numbers underneath it are usually shakier than he's letting on. Melissa and Kyle bought a bigger house in 2023, out past the county line. 4 bedrooms. A pool he was proud of, and I never once saw him actually swim in. I helped with the down payment, $22,000, because Melissa asked, and because Caleb was going to be living there. I have never once let my own history with a man stop me from doing right by my grandson. Deborah Brennan, Kyle's mother, started coming around more after that. Nice enough on the surface, always complimenting my truck or my garden, always finding a reason to ask how I was managing since Adele passed. 61 years old, twice divorced, lived in a condo in Ambrose that Kyle helped cover the mortgage on more often than either of them would admit out loud. She had opinions about my health before I'd said a word about my health, opinions about whether I should be driving that far to visit, whether the house on Kestrel Lane was getting to be too much for one man alone, whether it might be time to think about simplifying things. I heard that word for the first time in early 2025, simplify. Deborah said it at a Sunday dinner, light as a comment about the weather. Melissa didn't correct her. Kyle nodded along like it was just common sense. I sat at the end of my own table, ate my pot roast, and said nothing at all. I'd fixed enough electrical panels in my life to know that when something starts humming at a frequency, it's never hummed at before. You don't wait for it to explode. You start looking for the short, quietly, before anybody else even knows you're looking. So I started looking. I drove to Ambrose on a Thursday morning in March. No appointment. Just showed up at Priscilla Nolan's office the way I used to show up at job sites. Her assistant tried to tell me Priscilla was booked through noon. Priscilla heard my voice through the door and waved me in anyway. "Vernon," she said, "you look like a man with a question he doesn't want to ask out loud." "Deborah Brennan wants to help me simplify things," I said. "That's twice now I've heard that word. I want to know what it means." Priscilla leaned back in her chair a long moment. Then she pulled a folder from a drawer, already flagged, already waiting, like she'd known this conversation was coming before I did. "6 weeks ago," she said, "my office received a courtesy notice. A petition for guardianship was filed in Marathon County Circuit Court. Petitioner is Deborah Brennan. Proposed ward is you." I didn't say anything for a moment. I want to be honest about that. Even a man who doesn't raise his voice feels something drop through his chest, hearing a stranger's name filed next to his, in a courtroom he's never set foot in. "On what grounds?" I said. "A supporting letter," Priscilla said, "from a Dr. Averil Combs, stating cognitive concerns consistent with early decline. I've never met a Dr. Combs in my life." "I know," Priscilla said. I checked. "He's never examined you, never even had you as a patient. He's an internist in Ambrose who does occasional consulting work for a firm that handles elder care petitions. His letter doesn't cite a single test, a single visit, a single exam. 4 paragraphs of general language that could apply to any man over 70 who missed a phone call. Why would he sign that?" "Money," Priscilla said. "Or a favour." "Or both. I don't have proof yet on that piece. I have proof the petition exists. I have proof it's built on nothing." I sat there in that office a long moment, looking at the diplomas on her wall, thinking about Deborah Brennan standing in my kitchen calling it Simplify, thinking about Kyle nodding along at the dinner table, like a man agreeing with the weather. "What happens if it goes through?" I said. "If a judge grants it," Priscilla said, "a court-appointed guardian gets authority over your finances and your property decisions. Everything. The house, the shop building, the retainer, the accounts. You'd need the guardian's sign-off to sell anything, transfer anything, even move money between your own accounts. And who'd the guardian likely be? Deborah petitioned to be appointed herself," Priscilla said, "or a co-guardian arrangement with Kyle. It's in the filing." I felt something in my chest I hadn't felt since Adele's funeral. Cold and precise. Not rage. Rage is loud, and I've never had use for loud. This was quieter than rage. The feeling you get when you finally find the short that's been humming in a wall for months. And it's worse than you thought. Now you know exactly what has to happen next. "Is there anything they can actually take?" I asked her. "Or is this whole thing built on hoping I don't notice?" Priscilla almost smiled. "Vernon, 3 years ago you put the shop building, the 4 acres, and the scholarship trust into structures a guardian couldn't touch, with a court order and a crowbar. You did that before any of this started. You didn't know why you were doing it. You just did it." She was right. I hadn't known why back then. I'd just been a man who didn't like the idea of anything he built sitting exposed and unprotected. The same instinct that makes you run a ground wire even on a circuit that'll probably never fault. You don't wait for the fault, you wire it right the first time. "There's one thing still sitting exposed," Priscilla said. "Your primary accounts, the 600,000 from the sale. Those aren't in trust. If a guardianship goes through before you act, those accounts freeze under the guardian's control the same afternoon." I sat with that a moment. "Draft it," I said. "Whatever moves that money somewhere, Deborah Brennan's signature can't reach it. I'll sign whatever you put in front of me." "I already started," Priscilla said. She slid a folder across the desk. 3 pages. A revocable trust naming Caleb as the eventual beneficiary, with me as sole trustee for as long as I'm living and capable. Structured so no guardian, no court, no in-law could touch a dollar of it. Without proving in front of a judge, with medical evidence that I genuinely couldn't manage my own affairs. I read every word of it twice, then I signed it. "There's a hearing date on the guardianship petition," Priscilla said. 6 weeks out, May the 14th. I already filed our response. No medical evidence, no independent evaluation, no standing. I expect it gets dismissed outright, but a judge has to see the calendar first. "Fine," I said. "Let it run its course." I'm not going to go banging on Deborah Brennan's door over this. That's not how I do things. How do you want to handle Caleb's graduation? Priscilla asked. It's the same week as the hearing. You know the scholarship committee is finalising the award. I looked at her a long moment. Announce it exactly the way it was always going to be announced, I said. My wife's name. The full funding history, don't soften it for anybody's comfort. Priscilla nodded slow, like a woman who'd been waiting 3 years to say something in public she'd been carrying quiet the whole time. I stopped by the old shop on Substation Road on the way home. The building I still owned, even after selling the operation inside it. Walt Girard was there, same as most Thursdays, doing maintenance work on the old panel truck, out of habit more than necessity. Neither of us had run a real job in 5 years. You look like a man who found a bad short, Walt said, wiping his hands on a rag. Found the source of the hum, I said. Kyle's mother filed papers on me. Guardianship. Walt set the rag down slow. On what grounds? A doctor's letter from a man who's never examined me. Walt was quiet a long moment, the kind of quiet a man goes when he's deciding whether to say something he's been sitting on. You know Brennan Motors is carrying 40 extra cars on that lot right now, he said finally. My cousin does the detailing over there, says Kyle's been late on the floor plan draw twice this year. Lender's been calling the shop, asking for Kyle by name, not the sales manager. That's not a healthy business, Vernon. That's a man treading water. I stood there in my own old shop, smelling the same cut copper smell it had smelled like for 45 years. I understood finally the whole shape of it. Kyle wasn't scared of me being confused. Kyle was scared of a bank calling a note due on $140,000 he couldn't cover. Somewhere in his head, the shop building on Substation Road, paid off free and clear, 4 acres of land worth more every year, looked exactly like the collateral that could save him. All he needed was a guardian with the authority to refinance it. All he needed was one signature that wasn't mine. He's not evil, I said, more to myself than to Walt. He's drowning. Melissa's just standing next to him, too scared to say the water's over both their heads. Doesn't make it right, Walt said. No, I said. It doesn't. But it tells me what kind of ending this needs. Not a punishment, just gravity. Doing what gravity does when you stop holding something up. I drove home that night past the cemetery. Stopped, the way I do most weeks. Stood at Adele's stone a while in the cooling air. They're calling me confused, I told her. Quiet. The way you tell your wife something at the kitchen table. Same as always. I don't argue in a crowd. I just find the short and fix it. I could almost hear her answer. Then go fix it, Vernon. And for God's sake, don't miss supper doing it. 2 weeks after that visit to Priscilla's office, I went looking through the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. The one Adele kept her private things in. Letters and photographs and a few pieces of jewellery that never made it into a safe deposit box, because she liked having them close. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. Some nights a man just needs to touch the things his wife touched. I found a letter I'd never read. Sealed. My name on the front, in her handwriting. Dated the spring before she died. Tucked inside a hymnal from Riverside Baptist she hadn't opened in years. I sat on the edge of the bed a long time before I opened it. Vernon, it read. If you're reading this, I've probably already told you 100 times what I'm about to write, but you never listen the first 10 times, so here it is on paper where you can't argue with it. You built this town's wiring with your hands, and you never once let anybody make you feel small for not having a diploma to show for it. Don't you dare let this family make our grandson feel small for the same reason. Whatever you do with that money after I'm gone, make sure some of it goes toward a kid who's good with his hands and short on people telling him that's enough. And Vernon, if our grandchildren ever forget who wired this town, let the light do the talking. You don't have to raise your voice. You never have. Just make sure the light comes on when they need it to. I sat with that letter a long while. I want to tell you plainly there's no dignified way around it. I cried in that room by myself, an old man alone with a letter from his dead wife. I am not ashamed of that. Not one bit. Then I folded it back along its original crease, drove it to Ambrose the next morning, gave it to Priscilla Nolan to keep in the scholarship file, right alongside the trust documents. That letter was the reason the whole thing existed in the first place. I wanted it on record. This is remarkable, Vernon, Priscilla said, reading it at her desk. This is the whole case for why the fund exists, in her own words. Read it out loud, I said. When you announced the scholarship. If it fits. She said she would. I want to tell you about a family dinner around that same time, 3 weeks before the graduation. The dinner where I finally understood just how far Kyle Brennan had let himself slip. Melissa invited me over on a Sunday. Pot roast. The kind of dinner we'd had 100 times over the years. Deborah was there too, uninvited by me but apparently a regular fixture now. Caleb came down from his room in a t-shirt from a technical school. Open house he'd attended that spring. I asked him, easy, the way a grandfather asks, how the car business was doing these days. Since I hear it's booming. Kyle's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Just a half second. But I've spent 50 years reading the tell in a man's hands before I ever read it in his face. Kyle Brennan's hand told me everything. Booming, he said. A beat too fast. Best year yet. That's good to hear, I said. I heard somebody mention the lot's carrying a lot of extra inventory this spring. Must be a good problem to have. Where'd you hear that? Kyle said. His voice had an edge in it now, thin as a stripped wire. Small town, I said. People talk. Deborah jumped in smooth, the way she always does, redirecting like a woman who's had practice steering conversations away from cliffs. Vernon, we've actually been meaning to talk to you about something. Now that you're getting a little older, and things can get complicated to manage alone, we thought it might make sense to look at some paperwork together. Just to simplify things. There was that word again. Simplify. Third time now. What kind of paperwork? I said, calm, cutting my pot roast the same unhurried way I'd been cutting it my whole life. Oh, just some financial planning, Deborah said. Power of attorney, maybe. Nothing drastic. Just so someone can step in smoothly if you ever need help. I looked at Melissa. She was looking at her plate again, the same way she'd looked at those graduation programs. My own daughter sitting silent, while a woman who wasn't even blood asked me to sign my life over at a Sunday dinner table. I appreciate the concern, I said. I've got my affairs handled. Have for years. But I do appreciate it. Kyle's jaw tightened at that. He wanted more of a reaction out of me, I could tell. Wanted an old man who'd bristle or panic or ask questions that gave away how much I understood. I gave him none of it. Just kept eating my pot roast, calm as a Tuesday. You know, I said easy like it just occurred to me. The scholarship committee at the high school finalised this year's trade award. I heard Caleb won it. Caleb lit up at that. The first real smile I'd seen out of that boy in weeks. Yeah, Grandpa, some memorial fund thing. The counsellor said it's pretty generous. $4,000 a year if I keep my grades up in the programme. That's wonderful, I said. Whoever set that fund up sounds like they knew what they were doing. Kyle's eyes flicked to me for just a second. Sharp. Like a man checking whether a floorboard he just stepped on was about to give. He didn't know. Not yet. But something in the air at that table had shifted. Even a man drowning in his own debt can feel the water get a little colder around his ankles. I drove home that night and sat in my truck in the driveway a long while before I went inside, thinking about Deborah's smooth request for power of attorney, thinking about Kyle's flinch over the word booming, thinking about a letter from a dead woman telling me to let the light do the talking. I called Priscilla the next morning. They asked me for power of attorney at a dinner table. I told her, dressed up as concern. That's consistent with the guardianship filing, Priscilla said. If they can get you to sign voluntarily, they don't even need the court. It's cleaner for them. Less scrutiny. I'm not signing anything, I said. I know you're not, she said. Vernon, I want to tell you something. I want you to actually hear it, because you have a habit of underselling your own instincts. 3 years ago, you protected the shop building and funded a trust in your dead wife's name, before anyone in this family ever said the word guardianship out loud. You didn't wait for the threat to show itself. You built the wall before the storm showed up on the radar. That is not a confused man's instinct. That is the sharpest instinct I've seen in 9 years of doing this work. I didn't say much back to that. I don't take compliments well. Never have. Adele used to tease me about it constantly. But I sat in my truck outside Priscilla's office a few extra minutes before I drove home, letting that settle somewhere it needed to settle. The white envelope came together over the next several days. I'd been carrying it blank in my glove box for almost 2 weeks by then, waiting on one last document from Priscilla's office, a formal notarized letter transferring the shop building, the 4 acres, and the consulting retainer fully into an irrevocable trust that no guardian, present or future, could ever touch. Sole beneficiary, Caleb Brennan, dispersing only after he turned 25 or completed a trade credential, whichever came first. I addressed the envelope to Priscilla in my own hand the day it finally arrived complete. Sealed it, set it on the passenger seat of my truck. I drove it around with me for the better part of 2 weeks, like a man carrying a spare key to a door he hoped he'd never actually have to use. The hearing on the guardianship petition and Caleb's graduation ceremony landed in the same week, 6 days apart. Priscilla told me the hearing would likely be quick, a formality dismissing a case with no medical backing. But she warned me Deborah's attorney might try to delay, might try to introduce something new at the last minute to buy time. Let them try, I said. I'll be standing in whatever room they put me in, front or back, doesn't matter to me anymore. It mattered more than I let on. But that's the thing about a man who spent 50 years fixing what's broken quietly. You learn to let the outside stay calm, even when something underneath is working overtime. The hearing landed on a Tuesday morning, 8 days before the graduation. A courtroom in Ambrose. I'd never once had reason to sit in before. Small room, wood panelling gone a little dull with age. A county judge named Harmon Reyes who looked like he'd heard every kind of family fight this county had to offer, and wasn't in a mood to hear one more that didn't hold water. Deborah Brennan sat with her attorney at one table, a younger man named Pratt, who kept flipping through a folder like he was hoping to find something in it he hadn't already read 6 times. Kyle sat behind her in the gallery, not at her table. That told me something on its own. Even he didn't want to be seen putting his name directly on this filing. Priscilla and I sat at the other table. I wore my good suit, the same one I'd wear 6 days later at the graduation, because I only own the one. I sat with my hands folded on the table, the same calm way I sit anywhere. Judge Reyes read through the petition out loud. The medical letter from Dr. Avril Combs. The request for full guardianship of my person and my estate. Then he looked up over his glasses. Counsel, he said to Pratt, your supporting medical evidence is a 4-paragraph letter from a physician who, according to the response filed by Miss Nolan, has never examined the proposed ward. Is that accurate? Pratt shifted in his seat. Your Honour, Dr. Combs consulted based on second-hand reports from family members regarding some memory concerns and confusion in social settings. Second-hand reports of memory concerns, the judge said, flat. Can you point me to a single documented incident? A missed payment, a medical diagnosis, a police report, anything? Pratt flipped through his folder again. This is where the story could have taken a different turn. It almost did. Pratt pulled out a single sheet and held it up like he'd found something. Your Honour, we do have one incident. 3 weeks ago, Mr. Ferris was reportedly seen at his grandson's school, appearing disoriented, wandering the building, requiring assistance finding his seat at a public event. I felt my jaw tighten just barely. The first real flash of anger I'd let myself feel through this whole thing. I knew exactly what he was talking about. I knew exactly how twisted it had gotten in the retelling. Priscilla didn't even blink. Your Honour, if counsel is referring to an incident at Halden Springs High School, I'd ask the court's permission to introduce a piece of evidence. Judge Reyes nodded. Priscilla stood and handed the clerk a small drive. This is footage from the school's own security and livestream system, time-stamped, from the incident in question. They played it on a monitor in the corner of the courtroom. 31 seconds. Me, in my good suit, opening a panel behind a fire door, locating a loose neutral wire by feel in under 2 minutes, twisting a wire nut with steady hands, walking away as the flickering hallway light steadied into a clean, even glow. The room was quiet a moment. That's the incident, Judge Reyes said. Not really a question. Yes, Your Honour, Priscilla said. Mr. Ferris was denied his reserved seat at that event, and, rather than create a scene, repaired a faulty electrical panel the school district had apparently been unable to diagnose for several days. The school's facilities director has confirmed this in a signed statement, which I'd also like to submit. Judge Reyes looked at Pratt for a long moment, then at Deborah Brennan, who was staring hard at the table now instead of the judge. Counsel, Judge Reyes said, I've been on this bench 19 years. I have seen real guardianship cases. I have seen families use this court as a tool to gain control of an estate. This petition has no independent medical evaluation, no documented incident, and the one piece of evidence you try to introduce as proof of confusion is, on its face, proof of the opposite. I'm dismissing the petition with prejudice. I'm also referring the supporting letter from Dr. Combs to the State Medical Board for review, given the complete absence of any examination on record. Deborah's face went the colour of old drywall. Pratt started to object. Judge Reyes cut him off with one raised hand. "We're done here, counsel." I didn't smile in that courtroom. I want to be honest about that too. I felt something settle in my chest, something that had been sitting tight since a folding chair with somebody else's name on it. But I didn't smile. Deborah Brennan is still my grandson's grandmother on the other side, and gloating never fixed a single circuit in my life. Priscilla gathered her folder and papers slow, giving the room a moment to clear. Deborah's attorney leaned in close to her at their table, whispering something urgent I couldn't hear from across the room. Deborah shook her head at whatever he said. Once. Hard. The particular refusal of a woman who's already decided a fight isn't worth continuing. "That went about as clean as a dismissal can go," Priscilla said quietly, once we were alone in the hallway outside the courtroom. "Referral to the medical board is going to hurt Combs a great deal more than it hurts Deborah, honestly. He's the one who signed something with his name and license on it. She just believed a story she wanted to believe. Doesn't make what she did to me disappear," I said. "Wanting to believe something convenient doesn't excuse dragging it in front of a judge." "No," Priscilla agreed. "It doesn't. I'm not defending her, Vernon. I'm just telling you where the heavier consequence is likely to land, and it isn't on her. Not directly. Not yet." "It will," I said. "Give it time. These things have a way of finding the person who actually deserves them, same as water finds the low spot in a yard, no matter how many times you try to grade around it." We walked out to the parking lot together, Priscilla heading toward her own car, me toward my truck. The June sun already hot enough at 10 in the morning that I could feel my good suit sticking a little at the shoulders. 6 days until the graduation," Priscilla said, before we split off. "Are you ready for what happens after I read that letter?" "I've been ready 3 years," I said. "Question's never been whether I'm ready. Question's whether they are." "They're not," Priscilla said. "Nobody ever is, for a truth they've spent months telling themselves isn't real." Outside the courthouse, Kyle caught up to me in the parking lot. Alone. No Deborah, no Melissa. "Vernon," he said. "I didn't file that. That was my mother." "You sat behind her the whole hearing," I said. "You didn't stop her either." He didn't have an answer for that. His hands were in his pockets. For the first time in 11 years, I saw something on his face that wasn't confidence or slickness. It was closer to fear. "The lot's in trouble," he said, quiet, almost like a confession of his own. "The floor plan lender's been threatening to call the note. 140,000. I thought if I had access, if there was some way to refinance against my shop building," I said. "I know, Kyle, I've known for a while." He looked at me like a man who just realised the wall he'd been leaning on had never been solid in the first place. "I'm not going to help you do it this way," I said. "I never would have. All you had to do was ask me straight, man to man, the way you'd ask anybody else. Instead, your mother took it to a courtroom and called me confused in front of a judge." "I know," he said. "I know how it looks. It doesn't look like anything," I said. "It is what it is. Go home, Kyle. Talk to my daughter. Figure out what kind of husband you want to be before the bank figures out what kind of businessman you already are." Melissa's car pulled into the lot just then. I watched Kyle's face change again. The particular scramble of a man deciding, in real time, how much of this conversation he wants his wife to walk into the middle of. "Please," he said, low, fast, before she got within earshot. "Don't tell her about the realtor. Not yet. I'll tell her myself in my own time." I looked at him a long moment. "That's not my secret to keep or spill, Kyle. But I'll tell you this much. Every day you wait to tell her yourself is another day she finds out from somebody else instead. That never lands softer. Never once in my whole life has waiting made a hard truth easier to hear." He didn't answer that. Melissa reached us then, glancing between the two of us, reading the tension in the air the way a wife reads tension. Quick and wordless. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Everything's settled," I said. True enough for that moment in that parking lot, with a bigger truth still 6 days off from finding its own room to land in. "Take your husband home, Melissa. He's had a long morning." She looked at Kyle a beat longer, something searching in her face, then nodded. The two of them walked to her car together, Kyle's shoulders lower than I'd seen them in years. I left him standing in that parking lot, drove to the cemetery before I drove home, stood at Adele's stone a long while. They tried it in a courtroom, I told her. Judge saw right through it, didn't even need the envelope yet. I could feel her laughing at that, somewhere. Told you the light does the talking, Vernon. You just have to let it shine on the right wall. 6 days now until the graduation. 6 days until Priscilla stood on a stage in front of the whole family and said my dead wife's name out loud. The fun's whole history along with it, in front of every person who'd ever called me confused. I drove home and got my good suit pressed, set the white envelope back on the passenger seat. There was still one more piece of this to finish, one more signature waiting on the other side of that stage. Priscilla called me the next morning with something I hadn't expected. Vernon, she said, I think you should know. A realtor in Ambrose contacted our office yesterday afternoon, asking for a copy of the deed to the Substation Road property. Said a client wanted to explore a quick sale or a refinance. Which client? I said, already knowing the answer before I finished asking it. Kyle Brennan, she said. He apparently told the realtor he had authority to act on the property through an anticipated change in guardianship status. The realtor, to her credit, asked for documentation before doing anything further. That's when our office got the call, since we're listed as the registered agent on the trust. I sat with that a long moment, the phone warm against my ear, a feeling moving through my chest that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite sadness. Something closer to the specific weariness of watching a man you'd hoped better of confirm the worst read of himself one more time. He tried to sell it, I said, before the hearing even happened, before Deborah had any authority at all. He tried to explore selling it, Priscilla said, careful with her words the way she always is. Whether he had actual intent to close anything before the guardianship was granted, I can't say for certain. But he was moving in that direction. The realtor's already been told, in writing, that the property sits in an irrevocable trust with you, as sole trustee. Any further inquiry needs to come through this office. Does Melissa know? I asked. Not from us, Priscilla said. That's not something I'd disclose without your say-so. I thought about it a long moment. 4 days out from the graduation. 3 days out from the family finding out everything in a gymnasium full of witnesses anyway. I decided finally that Melissa deserved to hear this piece from me directly. Not second-hand. Not after the fact. I drove out to her house that same afternoon. Caught her alone in the kitchen. Kyle still at the lot. Caleb off with friends somewhere celebrating the last week before graduation. I need to tell you something before Saturday, I said, sitting across from her at the same table where Deborah had first said the word simplify. Kyle contacted a realtor yesterday about selling the shop building on Substation Road. Told her he expected to have authority soon. Melissa went very still. He wouldn't do that. He wouldn't sell something that isn't his. He believed it would be his, I said. Or his mother's, acting for both of them, once the guardianship went through. He was moving ahead of the hearing, Melissa, not waiting to see how it landed, already lining up a sale. That building's not even his to sell, she said. I watched something harden in her voice that hadn't been there in a long while, a flash of the woman who used to argue construction bids with subcontractors twice her age, back when she still worked summers in my office as a teenager. That's your business, your building, 50 years of your life. It's not mine anymore either, I said. Not exactly. It's Caleb's now, in trust. Has been for 3 weeks. She sat with that a long moment, working through the timeline the way I imagined she was working through everything else that week. Every piece finally sliding into a shape she could see whole. You did that before the hearing, she said. Before any of us even knew there was a hearing. I did it the same week the guardianship petition was filed, I said. The moment I found out about it, I moved to protect what mattered before anybody could reach it. I didn't do it out of spite, Melissa. I did it because I've spent 45 years fixing things before they fail, not after. She put her face in her hands for a moment at the table. When she looked back up, there were tears standing in her eyes that hadn't quite fallen yet. I married a man who tried to sell your life's work out from under you, she said, before a judge even said he could. And I didn't know. Dad, how did I not know? Because you weren't looking, I said, gentle as I could make it land. Same way I wasn't looking closely enough at Kyle back in 2014, when your mother told me she didn't trust the way he looked at people. I told her she worried too much. I was wrong. It cost us both a long time to see it clear. What happens now? She asked. Now we go to that graduation Saturday, I said. And the truth gets said out loud in front of everybody, whether it's comfortable or not. After that, you and Kyle figure out Together or apart? What kind of family you're going to build going forward? That part's not mine to decide. I've done what I can do to protect Caleb and to protect what your mother and I built. The rest of it belongs to you. I left her kitchen that evening with the sense that something in her had shifted for good. The particular hardening that happens in a person once they finally stop making excuses for somebody they love. I didn't know yet whether it would hold once the dust settled. I only knew it was real in that moment, sitting at that table. Real moments are usually the ones that end up mattering most, whatever comes after them. 4 days before the graduation, Caleb came by the house on Kestrel Lane on his own. No one asking him to. Driving the beat-up sedan Melissa and Kyle had bought him for his 16th birthday. He found me in the workshop out back, the same workshop I built the year I sold the business. Half hobby space, half a place to keep my hands busy in the quiet since Adele passed. "Grandpa," he said, standing in the doorway a minute before he said anything else, "can I ask you something and you tell me the truth?" "Always have," I said, not looking up from the panel I was cleaning, mostly for something to do with my hands while we talked. "Is Dad in trouble? Real trouble, not just, like, a bad month?" I set the panel down and looked at him. 19 years old, still built more like a boy than a man, but with a directness in his eyes that reminded me so much of Adele, it near stopped my breath some days. "I think your dad's in trouble," I said. "I don't know the whole shape of it yet, but I've heard enough to worry." "Mum's been weird," he said, whispering on the phone. "Dad's been staying late at the lot, even on days it's not busy. And Grandma Deborah keeps talking to me about how I should be understanding if things change around here." "Change how?" I asked. She didn't say exactly, just like prep me for something. I don't like it. It feels like everybody's protecting me from something instead of just telling me. I thought about that a long moment, how to answer a 19-year-old honestly, without handing him a burden that wasn't his yet to carry. "Here's what I can tell you, True," I said. "Your dad made some decisions with money that didn't work out the way he hoped. That happens to men, even good men, even smart men. It happened to me more than once building this business, though I never let it get as deep as I think it's gotten for him. Whatever happens with the business, it doesn't touch you. Not your school, not your scholarship, not this house you grew up thinking of as home. I've made sure of that a long time ago, before any of this trouble started." "How do you make sure of that?" he asked. I almost told him then. I came close, standing in that workshop with the smell of solder and old motor oil around us. Close enough that I could feel the shape of the words in my mouth. But I held back. Some things need their proper room to land in, and a workshop 4 days before a graduation wasn't it. "You'll understand soon enough," I said instead. "Trust me on the timing, if nothing else." He studied me a moment, the way a boy studies an adult when he suspects there's more going on than he's being told. Then he let it go, the way Adele used to let things go when she trusted a person enough not to push. "Okay," he said, "I trust you." Those 3 words sat with me the rest of that day and most of the night after he left. I trust you. From a boy who had every reason, growing up in that house, to have learned distrust as the safer default. The next morning, I drove to the old shop on Substation Road. Found Walt there again. Same as always, doing work that didn't need doing on a truck that didn't need it either. "You look like a man carrying something heavier than usual," Walt said. "Caleb came by yesterday," I said. "Asked me straight if his father's in real trouble. What did you tell him?" "Enough truth to hold him over." "Not the whole of it." Walt wiped his hands on the same rag he always uses, folded it, set it down deliberate. "My cousin over at the dealership told me something new this week," he said. "Kyle missed the floor plan draw again last month. Second time this year. Lender sent a formal notice. Not just a phone call this time. 30-day cure period before they start talking about calling the whole note." 140,000, I said. "That's the number," Walt said. "And here's the part you'll want to sit with, Vernon. My cousin says Kyle told the sales manager, in passing, that he's got a plan to shore things up by summer. Said it like a man who already knows where the money's coming from." I stood in that shop a long moment. The same cut copper smell in the air it smelled like for 45 years. I understood exactly what plan Kyle thought he had. The guardianship hearing was still 5 days off. He was still counting on it landing his way. "He's betting on Deborah's petition," I said. "Sounds like it," Walt said. "Then he's betting on ground that gave way 3 years ago," I said, "and he doesn't even know it yet." I drove home that afternoon and called Priscilla, told her what Walt had passed along. She confirmed what I already suspected. The timeline lined up exactly the way it looked. Kyle wasn't just hoping the guardianship petition would grant Deborah authority someday. He was counting on a specific calendar, betting his whole business on a court date that fell 6 days before his son's graduation, gambling that a judge would move fast enough to save him before the bank moved fast enough to bury him. "He's not a stupid man," Priscilla said. "He's a desperate one. Those aren't the same thing, but they can look identical from a distance." "I know," I said. "That's the part that makes this hard. If he was just cruel, this would be simple. He's not cruel. He's drowning, and he grabbed the only rope he could see, and it happened to be tied around an old man's neck instead of his own." "Does that change what you're going to do?" Priscilla asked. "No," I said. "It changes how I feel about doing it, not the doing itself." I went to see Melissa alone 2 days before the graduation, without Kyle there, sat with her at her own kitchen table, the way I used to sit with Adele at ours. "I need you to hear something from me directly," I said, "before Saturday. Whatever happens at that ceremony, whatever gets said out loud in that gymnasium, I didn't do any of it to hurt you. I built a scholarship in your mother's name 3 years ago because I couldn't stand the thought of her memory just fading into a headstone. I didn't build it to embarrass Kyle, or Deborah, or you. But things are going to come out Saturday that are going to embarrass all 3 of you anyway. The truth doesn't much care whose feelings it's convenient for." Melissa sat with that a long moment, hands wrapped around a coffee mug gone cold. "Is it bad, Dad? What's going to come out?" "It's going to come out that I've known about the guardianship petition for weeks," I said. "It's going to come out that your mother-in-law's doctor never examined me. And it's going to come out that the shop building Kyle's been quietly hoping to refinance hasn't been available to him in 3 years. I put it somewhere no court could reach it. Right around the time your mother died." Melissa's face went through several things in a row. Surprise. Then something like relief. Then something that looked almost like grief for a version of her family she'd been hoping still existed. "I should have known," she said quiet. "I should have asked more questions a long time ago." "Maybe," I said, "but you're asking them now. That counts for something, even if it's 5 weeks later than I would have liked." I left her kitchen that evening not knowing exactly how she'd carry herself into that gymnasium 2 days later, whether she'd finally look up from whatever stack of papers she'd been hiding behind, or whether old habits would hold one more time under pressure. I only knew I'd told her the truth as plainly as I knew how, the same way I've told every customer the truth about a bad panel for 45 years, whether they wanted to hear it or not. The morning of the graduation, Walt Gerard picked me up in his own truck instead of me driving myself. Said an old man shouldn't have to navigate Ambrose traffic and a gymnasium parking lot both in the same hour. I let him do it. Some mornings you let a friend take care of the small things so you have room left for the large ones. "You nervous?" Walt asked, pulling out of my driveway on Kestrel Lane. "No," I said, and meant it. "I've been ready for this morning 3 years. Nervous is what you feel before you know the outcome. I've known the outcome a long while now. Today's just the day everybody else finds out too." "Priscilla say anything more about how she's going to play it?" Walt asked. "Said she'd read Adele's letter if the moment called for it," I said. "Said she'd let the room decide how big it needed to be." We drove the 25 minutes to Holden Springs High in comfortable quiet. The same quiet Walt and I have shared through 45 years of job sites, and now through 5 years of neither one of us having a real job left to share. I watched the fields go by out the window, dairy country mostly, a few farms I'd wired myself decades back, still standing, still lit, long after the men who built them alongside me had mostly passed on or moved to Ambrose to be closer to their grandchildren. "You ever think about what Adele would say?" Walt asked, "seeing all this play out the way it's about to?" "Every day," I said. "I think she'd tell me I waited too long to let the truth out." She never had much patience for me sitting on something important past its proper time. "She'd have liked the letter idea, though," Walt said, reading it out loud. "She'd have liked that most of all," I said. "Adele never wanted credit, but she always wanted the truth spoken plain, even when it was inconvenient. Especially when it was inconvenient." We parked in the high school lot, already filling up fast with cars an hour before the ceremony. Family after family, unloading flower bouquets and folding chairs. The particular nervous energy that surrounds any small town's graduating class. I straightened my tie in the truck's side mirror. The same good suit I'd wear again 8 days later, in a courtroom I didn't yet know I'd be sitting in. Walt clapped me once on the shoulder before we walked in. "Whatever happens in there," he said, "you did right by that boy. However it lands." "I know," I said. "Doesn't make walking in any easier." It didn't, but I walked in anyway. The same way I've walked into every job site, every difficult customer meeting, every hard conversation of my whole life, one steady foot in front of the other. Calm on the outside, whatever was happening underneath. So that's how I ended up back where I started this story, standing at the back of a gymnasium in my good suit. A light panel fixed behind me, Walt Gerard at my side, watching my son-in-law sit in the chair that used to have my name on it, watching my daughter look at a stack of programs instead of her own father. I saw Priscilla Nolan come in through the side door, near the stage about 10 minutes before the ceremony started. Grey suit, same folder she'd carried into the courthouse 8 days earlier. She found me across that gymnasium the same way she'd find me anywhere, quick and certain. No wasted searching. She gave me one small nod, nothing anybody else in that crowd would have caught. I gave her one back. Confirmation, plain and simple. The kind two people exchange when a plan they've built together for 3 years is finally about to run its course. She took a seat near the front, reserved for staff and honoured guests, folder in her lap. I watched her open it once, check something inside, close it again. I knew without asking what page she'd checked. Adele's letter, photocopied clean, tucked behind the scholarship documents, waiting on exactly this kind of room to be read aloud in. The band finished tuning. Somebody dimmed the overhead lights halfway, the way schools do for a slideshow. A screen came down over the stage, showing photographs of the graduating class, kids in baseball caps and prom dresses. 4 years of Holden Springs High scrolling past in soft focus. I watched for Caleb's face in that reel and found it twice. Once at a robotics competition, once in a welding mask with the visor flipped up, grinning like a boy who'd found the thing he was good at. The principal opened the ceremony with the usual remarks, pride and gratitude and a joke about parking that got a small laugh. Then the diplomas started, name after name called across that stage, families clapping in ragged waves as their kids crossed in gowns 2 sizes too big. I watched Melissa clap for other people's children with her hands moving on their own. Mechanical. Her eyes somewhere else, entirely. I watched Kyle check his phone twice during the diploma calls. I understood exactly what he was checking. A man with a floor plan loan coming due doesn't stop watching his phone just because his son is graduating high school. Deborah sat very still in my seat. She hadn't looked back at me once since the usher moved me to the back wall. I don't think she'd expected me to still be standing there an hour later. Calm. Unbothered. A man who'd apparently accepted his demotion without complaint. That's the thing about people who mistake quiet for weak. They never see the rest of it coming, because they've already decided what kind of man you are before you've said a word. A woman I didn't recognise sat down next to Walt and me at the back wall about 20 minutes in. Folding chair borrowed from a stack near the door, fanning herself with her programme in the June heat that no amount of gymnasium air conditioning ever quite handles. She introduced herself as Carol Osei, a parent whose daughter was graduating same as Caleb. She'd noticed Walt and me standing a long while and figured we deserved a seat as much as anybody. Kind of you, I told her, but I'm fine standing. Old habit. Suit yourself, she said then, lower, almost to herself, though I heard some talk earlier about a mix-up with seating. Family stuff. Small towns. Word travels fast, I said. Always has, she said, and didn't push further. Which I appreciated. Some people know exactly how far to lean into a stranger's business, and how far to leave it be. Carol Osei struck me as that kind. I'd remember her name later because she ended up being one of a few dozen witnesses whose account of that afternoon got repeated around town in the weeks after. Always the same detail first, that the old man standing quiet at the back wall never once looked bothered by any of it. Diploma calls run alphabetical. Brennan sits early enough in that list that I had a long stretch of ceremony left to stand through once Caleb's turn came and went. I used that time the way I use most stretches of waiting, running numbers in my head the way Adele used to run them on paper. 60,000 in the trust, 4,000 a year in disbursements, 3 years running before this one. Roughly 48,000 still sitting in principal and accumulated interest. More than enough to carry the fund another decade, even before the Voss family ever thought to add to it. The shop building alone, 4 acres and a heated bay, appraised 11 months earlier at just under $310,000. Now sitting untouchable inside a trust that had taken Priscilla's office the better part of 2 years to structure exactly right the first time. Back before anybody in this family had said a word about guardianship. The consulting retainer, $4,000 a month, $48,000 a year, folded into that same structure. Add the $600,000 from the original sale, now move fully into the new trust Priscilla and I had signed 3 weeks earlier. All told, somewhere north of $1 million that Deborah Brennan's petition had been built to reach, and had never once come close to touching. I thought too about the $17,200 in legal fees I hadn't sent a bill for yet. That idea hadn't fully formed in my head until later that same week. And about the $140,000 sitting on Kyle's floor plan loan, like a stone tied to a man already treading water. Numbers like that used to keep me up some nights back when I was building the company from nothing, worrying over payroll, worrying over a customer who paid slow. I'd learned, somewhere along the way, that numbers stop being frightening. Once you've built enough of a wall around the ones that matter to you. I wasn't frightened sitting in that gymnasium. I was, if I'm honest, closer to still. Walt leaned toward me at one point, voice low under the applause for another graduate crossing the stage. You look calm for a man about to get his whole family flipped upside down in the next 20 minutes. I've had 3 years to get calm about it, I said. Calm's not the same as not caring, Walt. Calm's just what caring looks like once you've done all the work you can do, and there's nothing left but to let it land. Adele would have liked that line, Walt said. She'd have told me I stole it from her, I said. Walt almost laughed, quiet. The two of us standing at that back wall like a pair of old fence posts nobody had bothered to ask about being there. Caleb's name came up 2/3 through the alphabet. Brennan, Caleb, Andrew. He crossed that stage in his rented gown, grinning wide enough that I could see it from the back wall, shook the principal's hand. For 1 second, before he found his seat again, he scanned the crowd. I don't know if he was looking for his parents or for me. Either way, I raised one hand, just to my shoulder. Nothing that would draw attention. He saw it, grinned wider. I watched him settle back into his seat between 2 classmates, gown draped over the folding chair, cap tilted back on his head the careless way boys that age wear anything on their heads. I thought about the promise I'd made him at the hospital, 19 years earlier, that he'd never grow up thinking his hands were worth less than somebody else's diploma. He was holding that diploma now, in a cardboard sleeve, same as every other kid in that gymnasium. What none of them held yet was the other envelope, the one that would tell them which of these graduates had spent 4 years building something with their hands worth honouring the same way. Walt leaned in again, quiet under the applause for the next graduate crossing the stage. You ever think about what you're going to say, he asked, if somebody puts a microphone in front of you, after all this? Nothing, I said. That's the whole point, Walt. I've spent 3 years letting the paperwork do the talking instead of me. I don't intend to change that now. Not in front of the one crowd where it matters most, even if they ask you direct. Especially then, I said. A man who's spent his life proving things with his hands doesn't need to prove anything else with his mouth. Let Priscilla read the letter. Let the room draw its own conclusions. I'll just stand here, same as I've stood at the back of every job site I ever ran, watching the work speak for itself. Walt nodded slow, the kind of nod that means agreement without needing another word to confirm it. The two of us went back to watching the stage, the alphabet climbing steady toward its end. Each name called a little step closer to the moment neither one of us had said out loud yet, though both of us were carrying it the same way. The last of the diplomas wrapped up maybe 15 minutes later. A girl named Patricia Osei, Carol's daughter as it turned out, crossing the stage to loud applause from our little cluster at the back wall. Carol on her feet clapping harder than anybody else in the building. I clapped for her too. A graduation is still a graduation, whatever else is happening underneath it. The principal announced 3 other awards first. A community service citation, an athletic scholarship from a booster club, a small memorial award for a teacher who'd retired that spring, each one drawing its own round of applause, its own family standing up in the crowd to snap photos. I stood through all of it patient, the way you stand through the small checks on a panel, before you get to the breaker that actually matters. Kyle's phone buzzed in his pocket during the athletic award. I watched him glance down at it, quick, then silence it without looking twice. his jaw tightening the same way it had at the dinner table 3 weeks earlier over the word booming. I had a fair guess what that call was. Priscilla had mentioned in passing that week that the floor plan lender's collections department tended to call on Fridays. Tidy little reminder before the weekend that a debt doesn't take a day off just because a family's celebrating something. Melissa noticed the phone too. I could see it in the set of her shoulders. A small flinch that told me whatever piece she'd been holding onto for that ceremony was thinner than she wanted it to look. The community service citation went to a girl who'd spent 2 years organising a food pantry drive. Her whole row stood up clapping. I clapped along with them, meaning it. A kid doing right by a town deserves the applause, whether or not it has anything to do with my own family's business. The athletic scholarship went to a boy I recognised as Walt's neighbour's grandson, a solid $3,000 toward a state school. Walt leaned over and told me quietly that the boy's father had been out of work most of the year, so that scholarship was going to matter more than the programme made it sound. The memorial award for the retired teacher ran long, a slideshow of her 30 years in the classroom. Kids from a decade of graduating classes sending in short video messages. I thought of Adele the whole time it played. 31 years of her own classroom. Never once given a stage moment like this while she was alive to see it. That thought sat heavy in me a moment. Adele never got a retirement slideshow. She died mid-career, still grading spelling tests the week she went into the hospital. No gymnasium full of grateful former students ever stood up to applaud her 31 years. The way this room was standing up for a woman who'd simply had the good fortune to retire instead of pass. I didn't resent that teacher her tribute. I just felt, standing there, that whatever was about to happen next carried a little more weight for me than it might for anyone else in that building. It was the closest thing Adele Ferris was ever going to get to her own moment on a stage. Then the diplomas finished. The principal stepped back to the microphone, said the words I'd been waiting 3 years to hear out loud in a room full of people. Before we close today's ceremony, I'd like to invite attorney Priscilla Nolan to the podium to present this year's Trade and Technical Scholarship. I felt Walt's hand land on my shoulder, quiet, steady, the same way he used to steady a ladder for me 40 years ago. Priscilla Nolan walked up in a grey suit, folder in hand, calm as she'd been in her own office, calm as she'd been in that courtroom 8 days earlier. She adjusted the microphone and looked out over the gymnasium. I watched her eyes find me all the way in the back before she started speaking. Each year, she said, Holden Springs High awards the Adele Ferris Memorial Scholarship for Trade and Technical Excellence to one graduating senior pursuing a career built with their hands. This year's fund stands at $60,000. Established 3 years ago. I watched Melissa's head come up slow, like a woman hearing a name she hadn't expected to hear in this room. Adele Ferris taught 3rd grade in this town for 31 years, Priscilla continued. She believed more than almost anything else that the kids who build things with their hands deserve the same respect this world gives a diploma on a wall. This fund was established in her memory 3 years ago by her husband. The gymnasium was quiet in that particular way. A room gets quiet when several hundred people realise they're about to hear something they weren't expecting. Vernon Ferris, Priscilla said, sold his business the year his wife passed and used a portion of the proceeds to fund this scholarship, in her name, asking that it never be publicly tied to his own. He is here today, and I think given the circumstances of this graduating class and this family, it's worth saying so out loud. Every head in that gymnasium turned. I felt it more than saw it, a wave of motion rippling from the front rows to the back. I stood there at the back wall in my good suit, hands folded, the same calm I'd carried into that room an hour earlier. Deborah Brennan turned in her seat. In my seat. She looked at me with an expression I'll remember the rest of my life. Somewhere between disbelief and the particular horror of a person watching a plan collapse in real time, in front of several hundred witnesses. Kyle turned too. I watched the colour leave his face the way I've watched a breaker trip. All at once. No warning. Just dark. Priscilla let the room sit in that quieter moment before she went on. That's a lawyer's instinct, I think. Letting a fact breathe before you build the next one on top of it. I'd like to read something, she said, if the family will permit it. Vernon's wife left a letter with instructions for this fund, written before she passed. I think her words say it better than mine can. She looked out at me, one more time, a question in her face, and I nodded just once from the back wall. Vernon, Priscilla read, and her voice carried clean across that gymnasium through the microphone. If you're reading this, I've probably already told you 100 times what I'm about to write, but you never listen the first 10 times, so here it is on paper where you can't argue with it. You built this town's wiring with your hands, and you never once let anybody make you feel small for not having a diploma to show for it. Don't you dare let this family make our grandson feel small for the same reason. Whatever you do with that money after I'm gone, make sure some of it goes toward a kid who's good with his hands and short on people telling him that's enough. And Vernon, if our grandchildren ever forget who wired this town, let the light do the talking. You don't have to raise your voice. You never have. Just make sure the light comes on when they need it to. I heard someone in the crowd start crying. Quiet. A woman a few rows back who probably had no idea who any of us were and just felt the weight of it anyway. That's the thing about a letter like that. It doesn't need to know you personally to land somewhere true. This year, Priscilla said, the Adele Ferris Memorial Scholarship goes to a young man who applied on his own merit, without knowing the fund's history, without knowing his own grandmother's name sat behind it. Caleb Brennan. Caleb stood up slow from his seat near the front. Gown still on, cap still in his hand. He walked to the stage looking like a boy who'd just had the ground shift under him in the best possible way. He shook Priscilla's hand, took the certificate and the folder that came with it, and then did something I hadn't planned for and couldn't have scripted if I'd tried. He looked out into the gymnasium, found me at the back wall, and walked straight off the stage toward me instead of back to his seat. The whole room watched him do it. Several hundred people watched a boy in a graduation gown cross an entire gymnasium floor to reach an old man standing alone at the back wall. When he got there, he didn't say anything at first. He just hugged me. Hard. The way boys that age don't usually let themselves hug anybody in public. You did this, he said into my shoulder, quiet enough that only I could hear it. This whole time it was you. Your grandmother did this, I said. I just carried the paperwork. He pulled back and looked at me, eyes wet, not embarrassed about it. They told me to sit in the back row today. Deborah said it'd be easier for photos. I didn't even think about it until right now, but you were standing back here the whole ceremony. I was, I said. Somebody gave my seat away before it started. Caleb's face changed at that. Understanding landing slow. Then all at once, the way it does with kids that age when they finally see something they've been standing too close to notice. He turned and looked across the gymnasium at his father, still frozen in his seat, and at Deborah Brennan, who wouldn't meet his eyes at all. That's messed up, Caleb said. Quiet. To me, not to them. It's all right, I said. Everything's exactly where it needs to be now. I want to tell you what the rest of that gymnasium looked like in the minute after. I've thought about it 100 times since. Families around Deborah's row leaning in, whispering. The particular electricity of several hundred people realizing in real time that the story they thought they knew about a family had just flipped its whole shape in front of them. Somewhere near the front, I heard someone say the words that man fixed our lights, in a voice loud enough to carry. I understood then that the school's live stream clip had already made its way around the parent group chat sometime in the last hour. More than a few heads were nodding like they'd already seen it. Walt Girard stood beside me the whole time, arms crossed, saying nothing. The way he always says nothing, when nothing needs saying. The ceremony wound down after that, the principal closing with a final word about the class's future. The recessional music starting up, families standing and gathering caps and flowers and phones held up for one more photo. But something had shifted in that gymnasium that no closing remarks were going to smooth back over. I found Melissa near the exit doors, alone. Kyle already outside with Deborah, the two of them talking low and fast, in a way that told me the panic had set in for real now. Dad, Melissa said, and her voice cracked on the word in a way I hadn't heard since she was a girl. I didn't know. About the fund, about any of it. I know you didn't, I said. I didn't tell you on purpose. Why not? She said. Why would you keep something like that from me? Because I wasn't sure yet, I said, whether you were still my daughter, or whether you'd already turned into somebody who'd let her own father stand in the back of a room because a woman who married into this family told you it'd be easier for photos. She flinched at that. Harder than I meant it to land. But I carried that sentence around a long time, and it needed saying. I'm still your daughter, she said, quiet. Then start acting like it, I said. Not today. Not with an apology in a gymnasium doorway. Show me over time. That's the only kind of proof that's ever meant anything to me. She nodded, tears on her face now, not making a scene, just standing there letting them fall. I didn't hug her. Not yet. Some things you don't rush. Same way you don't rush a weld before it's cooled. Outside in the parking lot, Deborah Brennan was already in her car, engine running, not looking at anybody. Kyle stood near his truck, phone in hand. I watched him read something on the screen that made his shoulders drop another inch. I had a fair guess what it was. I found out 2 days later I'd guessed right. The floor plan lender, informed through routine channels that the guardianship petition against me had been dismissed with prejudice and referred to the medical board, and apparently spooked by the sudden public attention around the family's finances after the ceremony, called the note due in full. $140,000. Due within 30 days. No extension offered. Kyle didn't have it. He never had it. The whole plan from the moment Deborah first said the word simplify at my kitchen table had been built on the assumption that my shop building would be sitting there, unprotected, waiting to be refinanced the moment a guardian got the authority to sign for it. It never was unprotected. It hadn't been unprotected in 3 years. I still had the white envelope sitting on the passenger seat of my truck the morning after the graduation. I'd meant to hand it to Priscilla at the ceremony itself, but with everything that happened on that stage, with Caleb crossing the gym floor to reach me, it never felt like the moment. Some things need their own room to land in. I drove it to Ambrose myself instead. The Monday after, Priscilla read through the notarized transfer letter at her desk, while I sat across from her the way I had 3 years earlier. This finalizes the irrevocable trust, she said, flipping to the last page. Shop building, the 4 acres, the consulting retainer, all folded in permanently. Caleb as sole eventual beneficiary, you as trustee for as long as you're living and capable. No guardian or court able to touch a dollar of it without a real medical finding in front of a judge, which, given what just happened to Dr. Combs's letter, isn't going to be easy for anybody to manufacture again in this county. Good, I said. Vernon, she said, setting the folder down, I want to ask you something, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to. Did you know 3 years ago that it would come to this? A guardianship petition, a courtroom, a graduation stage. I thought about that a long moment before I answered. No, I said. I didn't know the shape of it. I just knew a wife who spent 44 years watching over the books at a kitchen table doesn't stop watching over things just because she's gone. I figured if I built the wall solid enough and quiet enough, it wouldn't matter what shape the storm came in. It'd just bounce off. Priscilla nodded slow. It bounced off. The weeks after the graduation weren't simple. A family doesn't put itself back together in a single ceremony. Melissa called me twice that first week, short and careful. Caleb came by the workshop 3 times in 10 days, asking me questions about wiring and talk his own father had never once asked in 11 years married into this family. Kyle didn't call at all. A man watching his business collapse rarely has room left over for phone calls to the father-in-law he tried to have declared incompetent. The floor plan lender gave him 30 days. He tried 2 other banks, both of whom pulled his credit and found the guardianship filing sitting dismissed with prejudice in the public record, a flag no loan officer once attached to a file. He sold inventory at a loss, digging the hole deeper with every unit moved. He asked Deborah for a loan against her condo, Melissa told me later, and Deborah, whose own mortgage Kyle had been quietly covering more than he either admitted, didn't have anything left to give. Holden Springs is small enough that these things don't stay quiet. By the 3rd week, half the county had heard some version of it. The contractor who fixed the school's lights, the petition thrown out, the used car lot suddenly running a going out of business banner. I didn't spread a word of it myself. I didn't need to. A town runs on its own current, and once you stop standing in the way of the truth, it finds its path same as electricity always does, straight to whoever's still holding the short. 3 weeks after the graduation, the medical board notified Dr. Averill Combs that his letter was under formal review for a signature issued without any documented examination. His consulting arrangement with the elder care filing firm ended within days. Quiet, no statement. And Deborah Brennan found herself 4 weeks later named in a bar complaint against Attorney Pratt for filing without factual basis, and named separately in a demand letter from my own attorney for the costs of defending against a bad faith filing, $17,200 I fully intended to collect. My father used to say, a debt collected quietly is worth twice one collected loud because the man who pays it quiet still has to live with himself the next morning. I didn't send that letter to humiliate her. I sent it because $17,200 is $17,200, and a man who built every dollar with his own hands doesn't eat a bill that isn't his. I knew it would land at the worst possible moment. I sent it anyway because fair is fair. 5 weeks after the graduation, Melissa called and asked if I'd come to a family meeting. Her house, out past the county line, the one with the pool Kyle was so proud of and never swam in. She said Kyle wanted to talk, that things had gotten bad enough that he'd finally agreed to sit down and be honest about all of it. With Deborah there too, and Priscilla if I wanted her there. I told her I'd come, and I told her to make sure Deborah understood one thing before I walked through that door. Whatever came out of that conversation, I wasn't there to gloat, and I wasn't there to forgive on the spot either. I was there because my daughter asked me to be, and because a boy named Caleb Brennan still lived in that house and deserved to see his grandfather handle the end of this the same way he'd handled the beginning of it. Quiet. Precise. Done exactly once. I asked Priscilla to come along, not to speak unless it was needed, just to sit with a folder in her lap the way she always does, because I've learned that her lawyer's presence changes the shape of a room, even when she says nothing at all. We drove out together on a Saturday afternoon in June. Hot enough that the pool water in Kyle's backyard looked almost tempting through the fence, though I noticed it hadn't been cleaned in a while, green starting to creep along the tile line. That told me something about where the family's attention had been going the last 5 weeks. Melissa met us at the door, thinner than I remembered. The particular kind of tired that comes from carrying a secret you didn't create but still have to live inside. Kyle was in the living room, sitting on the edge of the couch instead of leaning back into it, hands clasped between his knees like a man in a waiting room. Deborah sat in an armchair across from him, purse still on her lap, the same way it had been in my seat at the graduation, like she needed something to hold on to. Caleb was upstairs, Melissa said. She'd asked him to stay in his room for this part. I told her that was fine. Some conversations a young man doesn't need to sit through, even if he already knows most of what's in them. Thank you for coming, Dad, Melissa said, and she sat down next to me on the love seat, close the way she used to sit next to me in church as a girl. Kyle looked up first. Vernon, he said, I owe you an apology. A real one, not the parking lot version. I'm listening, I said. The lot's gone, he said. I sold what inventory I could at a loss, paid down what I could of the floor plan note. I'm still short about $60,000 the bank's coming after personally, since I guaranteed it myself. I lost the business my father-in-law never got the chance to hand me, because I never asked him for help the right way. I went around him. I let my mother go around him, and I told a judge, indirectly, that a man who fixed an electrical panel with his bare hands in under 2 minutes was too confused to manage his own life. He looked at me straight on. When he said that last part, I'll give him this much credit. He didn't look away from it. I'm not asking you to fix this, he said. I know I don't get to ask that anymore. I just wanted you to hear me say, in front of my wife, in front of my mother, that what we did was wrong. It wasn't about you being confused. It was about me being scared and too proud to say so. I sat with that a long moment. The room was quiet enough I could hear the pool filter running out back. The same hollow hum I've heard in 100 backyards over 50 years of wiring this town. You're not wrong that you were scared, I said. Being scared isn't a sin, Kyle. I've been scared plenty in my life. I was scared the day I signed the first lease on that shed on Substation Road. $400 in tools. A wife 3 months into our marriage. Being scared doesn't excuse what you built out of it. You had a father-in-law with 50 years of experience, building things from nothing, sitting right across the table from you at every holiday for over a decade. Instead of asking me for help, you and your mother tried to have me declared unfit so you could take what you needed without ever having to ask. Deborah shifted in her chair. Vernon, I want you to know, I never wanted it to go as far as it did. I was scared for my son. A mother does things out of fear she wouldn't otherwise do. I believe that, I said, and I meant it. But fear doesn't excuse hiring a doctor who's never examined me to sign a letter saying I'm losing my mind. Fear doesn't excuse filing that in a courtroom, in public record, where my own grandson could have read it one day and wondered if it was true. You didn't just come after my money, Deborah. You came after my name. That's the part I can't shrug off as easy. The room stayed quiet a long moment. Priscilla sat still beside me. Folder closed in her lap, letting the silence do its work the way she always does. There's a demand letter you sent, Deborah said finally. Quiet. $17,200. I got it 3 weeks ago. I know, I said. It's accurate. That's what defending against your petition cost me in legal fees. I built every dollar I have with my own hands, Deborah. I don't absorb a bill that isn't mine because the person who created it is having a hard year. I don't have it, she said. Not right now. Not with Kyle's business gone and me helping him where I can. I know you don't, I said. That's why I structured it as a payment plan through Priscilla's office, instead of a lump sum. $200 a month for the better part of 7 years. No interest. You'll pay it. Slowly. The way most debts in this life actually get paid. One honest month at a time. Kyle's head came up at that. I think he'd expected something harsher out of me. A foreclosure, a lawsuit, some version of the ruin he'd tried to visit on me first. Instead, I'd handed his mother a bill sized to her actual ability to pay it, structured so it would never break her, only remind her, every month for 7 years, exactly what that guardianship petition had cost. Why, Melissa asked. Quiet next to me. Why not just let it go, Dad, after everything? Because letting it go teaches nobody anything, I said. And because making it impossible to pay teaches the wrong lesson too. A debt you can actually pay, slow and steady, is the only kind that ever changes a person. I learned that building a business for 45 years, you don't burn a customer down over one bad invoice. You collect what's owed fair. Let the relationship survive it if it's worth surviving. I looked at Kyle directly then. As for you, I said, I'm not loaning you another $18,000 like I did back in 2016. And I'm not refinancing anything against the shop building. That building isn't mine to refinance anymore. It's in an irrevocable trust for Caleb now. Has been for 5 weeks. It was never available to save your business, Kyle. Not before the petition, not after it. You went to war over ground that had already been given away. Kyle absorbed that slow, the way a man absorbs a fact he'd suspected but never confirmed. The trust, he said. That's real. Permanent. Permanent, Priscilla confirmed. The first word she'd spoken since we sat down. Filed, notarized, recorded at the county. Caleb's when he's 25. Or finishes a trade credential. Whichever comes first. Not subject to guardianship, divorce, bankruptcy, or refinancing by anyone but Caleb himself, once he's old enough to make that choice. Kyle put his face in his hands for a moment. Not crying exactly. More like a man finally setting down something heavy he'd been carrying wrong for a long time. What I can offer you, I said, isn't money. It's this. Get honest with my daughter about every account, every debt, every number. Starting tonight. No more hiding a floor plan loan for 2 years while you talk about booming business at my dinner table. Get honest with your son about what happened. All of it. So he learns the lesson without having to make the same mistake himself one day. If you do that, slow, over time, the same way Deborah's going to pay that $17,200 back 1 month at a time, then there's a door open between us, not today, not because you apologized in a living room. Over time. That's fair, Kyle said, quiet. That's more than fair. Melissa reached over and took my hand on the love seat. First time she'd touched me since before the graduation. I let her. I'm sorry too, Dad, she said. I should have said something the second Kyle gave your seat away. I saw it happen and I looked at a stack of programs instead. I know, I said. I watched you do it. It's the thing that hurt worst out of all of it, if I'm honest. Not the guardianship. Not Deborah's doctor. You, looking at paper instead of your own father. I won't do it again, she said. I believe you want to mean that, I said. Whether you do, I'll find out the same way I find out everything. Slow. Over time. Watching what you do instead of what you say. I stood up to leave not long after that. I've never been a man who sits in a room longer than the conversation needs. Priscilla gathered her folder. Melissa walked us to the door. Caleb came down the stairs just as we were leaving, like he'd been listening from the landing the whole time. Which I suspect he had. Grandpa, he said, you're not staying for dinner. Not tonight, I said. But soon, I promise you that. He hugged me again at the door, the same hard hug from the gymnasium. I drove home that evening with Priscilla in the passenger seat instead of a white envelope. For the first time in months, the seat beside me held nothing that needed carrying. 10 weeks after the graduation, Holden Springs held its Founders Day Festival in the town square, same as it does every August. The school district asked me to come up on the little stage there and say a few words about the scholarship fund. Word had spread through the county about Adele's name and what it had funded. A second family, the Voss family, had come forward wanting to add $10,000 in memory of their own father, a retired plumber, once they heard the story. I almost said no. 50 years of talking to customers one at a time never made me a stage man. But Priscilla told me something that stuck, that sometimes the last brick in a wall isn't for keeping something out anymore. It's for showing people what got built, so they know it's safe to add their own bricks to it. So, I said yes. I kept it short. The same good suit. The crowd half the county, farmers and teachers who remembered Adele from her classroom 30 years back. My wife taught third grade in this town for 31 years, I said. She believed a kid who's good with a wrench deserves the same respect as a kid who's good with a textbook. This year, for reasons that got more public than I intended, that fund found its way into the light. I'm grateful it did, because the Voss family decided their father's memory belonged next to hers. Now there's more of it than there ever would have been if I'd kept it quiet forever. I found Melissa and Kyle in the crowd, Caleb between them, Walt off to one side, arms crossed the way he always stands. I spent most of my life being the quiet one in the room, I said. I still am. Quiet doesn't mean invisible. It just means you wait until the moment matters, and then you let the truth talk instead of you. Caleb met me at the bottom of the steps, grinning the way he'd grinned crossing the gymnasium floor. You're getting good at that, Grandpa, he said. The talking part. Don't get used to it, I said. I'll be back to my usual amount of words by Monday. Kyle shook my hand that day for the first time since the living room. Firm and honest. No extra half-second on it. He'd taken a job managing parts at a dealership 2 towns over. Steady work. A fraction of what Brennan Motors used to bring in on paper. First job in years, he told me, where he slept without doing math on numbers that didn't add up. Deborah still owes $11,400 on that payment plan. $200 a month. On time every month so far. She doesn't come to every family dinner. She comes to some, I let her. Caleb still has 2 grandmothers, even if one has some rebuilding left to do. I think about the seat they gave away more than I probably should. Not with anger anymore, closer to gratitude. If they'd never taken that chair, I don't know the scholarship surfaces the way it did, in front of that many witnesses. Sometimes the wrong they do, you clears the path for the truth to walk down. Caleb started his trade program that fall, an electrical apprenticeship in Warsaw, close enough that he still comes home most weekends. He's got Adele's patience and my hands. He asked me things most 19-year-olds wouldn't think to ask. How you know a splice is solid without testing it. Which kind of man ends up broke by 50 and which kind doesn't. I told him once, out in the workshop, that the trade teaches you more about people than it teaches you about wire. You learn who cuts corners, who tells you a job's done when it isn't, how to spot the difference between a man who's actually competent and one who's just loud about it. He just nodded the way Walt nods, quiet, filing it away. I think that boy is going to turn out fine, better than fine. Melissa and I talk most weeks now. Not every conversation is easy, but she shows up. She calls when she says she'll call. She brought Caleb by on his birthday with a cake from the same bakery Adele used to order from, and she didn't have to think twice which bakery that was. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust Kyle the way you trust a man who's never given you a reason not to. Trust rebuilt after a real betrayal comes back thinner, like a weld that held but you can still see the seam. It holds, it's just never quite invisible again. I can live with that. What I won't do is pretend none of it happened. I bring it up sometimes, not to punish anybody, just so it stays real in the room, the way a scar stays real on a hand. I still drive past the cemetery most weeks. Adele's stone sits under that maple that turns the colour of a torch every October. I stand there sometimes for 5 minutes, sometimes for 20, telling her whatever's happened since the last time I stood there. I told her about the Founders Day stage, about the Voss family adding $10,000 to her fund, about Caleb's apprenticeship, about Deborah's $200 a month arriving steady as a heartbeat. I told her too about the night after the graduation, the one I haven't told anybody else about. It felt like it belonged only to the two of us. I'd driven home from that ceremony with Caleb in the passenger seat of my truck instead of Melissa's car. He'd asked, quiet, if he could ride with me instead. I hadn't asked why, he hadn't offered a reason. We'd just driven the back roads out toward Kestrel Lane in comfortable silence, the way men in this family have always been comfortable in silence. I pulled into my own driveway and cut the engine. Neither of us got out right away. We sat on the tailgate instead, out back where the light was starting to go gold, the way it does in early summer evenings in this part of Wisconsin. The garden Adele planted, humming with bees that hadn't gotten the message the day was ending. I reached under the truck's bench seat and pulled out a small case I'd kept there for 2 weeks, waiting on the right moment, handed it to Caleb without a word. He opened it slow. Adele's old reading glasses, folded inside their case, the way she always folded them. Underneath them, tucked flat, the scholarship paperwork, the whole history of the fund, her letter photocopied and included at the very back. These were Grandma's, he said, running a finger along the frame. They were, I said. I've kept them on my nightstand 5 years. Never needed them for anything, just needed them close. Why give them to me now? I thought about how to answer that a long moment, the tailgate creaking soft under us, the light going a little more gold every minute. Because nobody ever has to give you a seat, I said, if you already own the room. Your grandmother knew that about teaching. I learnt it the hard way about wiring a whole town for 50 years, then learnt it again the harder way this spring, standing at the back of a gymnasium. You don't need somebody to save you a chair, Caleb. You need to build something solid enough that the room turns around and looks for you, whether there's a chair waiting or not. He held those glasses a long moment, turning the case over in his hands, then closed it careful, the way you close something you already know you're going to keep the rest of your life. I'm going to keep these safe, he said. I know you will, I said. Your grandmother would have liked knowing that. We sat on that tailgate until the light went from gold to that deep blue that comes right before full dark. Not saying much else. Some evenings don't need many more words than that. Just a man and his grandson, a pair of old reading glasses, and a piece of paper with a dead woman's name on it, finally sitting exactly where it always should have. I never raised my voice through any of it. Not at the graduation, not in that courtroom, not in a living room full of apologies I'd waited months to hear. I never had to. I just found the short, the way I've found 1,000 shorts in 45 years of wiring this town. Fixed it, quiet. Let the light do the talking the rest of the way. That's the whole of it. That's the only kind of justice I've ever believed in. Not loud, not cruel, just accurate and patient and paid in full, one honest month at a time.